The NFL scouting combine's happening this weekend in Indianapolis. What sort of players should the Jets look for as they try to rebuild their offense? We'll talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, March 1st, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's show, we're going to talk about how the Jets should try to rebuild their offense this offseason. The NFL Scouting Combine is taking place this weekend in Indianapolis. Defensive players got us going on Thursday. They were the first players to hit the field for the drills. But what traits should the Jets be looking for as they try to build an offense around Aaron Rodgers? That's what we're going to talk about on today's show, and it can clue you in on as to some of the drills you might be interested in this weekend once the skill players hit the field in Indianapolis. Now, I think Thursday was a good day for the New York Jets, even though there were a lot of defensive players on the field. Let me explain why. There were a lot of standout performers in the combine on Thursday on the defensive side of the ball. And the reason that's good is we want as many defensive players to go high in the draft as possible, because I think we know the Jets are probably not taking a defensive player in the first round. So if every defensive player that goes in the top 10 pushes down an offensive player who could interest the Jets. You want the guys you're not interested in to go higher because it pushes down the guys you could be interested in. I'll throw a caveat out here as we discuss this. As we all know, the combine has some utility, but we should not take the results too seriously. A guy can be a great performer in the combine. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a great player in the NFL. It means he's very athletic, but there's more to playing successfully in the NFL than raw athleticism. However, there are certain traits I think could help the New York Jets as they try and rebuild their offense. We're going to talk about some of those traits. And I think the first trait on offense the Jets need is speed. I think the Jets need to get faster on offense, especially at the skill positions. In fact, really the only player I think currently on the offense who has home run type speed is Breece Hall. And we know Breece Hall is a big time home run hitter. But if you look across the rest of the offense, there's not a lot of speed. Garrett Wilson's fast, but I don't know that Garrett Wilson's necessarily a home run hitter. Garrett Wilson's a great route runner. He's a guy great at creating separation, really impressive change of direction ability. He can make guys miss in the open field. He can shake defenders when he's on a route, but he's not really a guy who's, at this point of his career at least, a threat to taking the distance on every play. He's an excellent receiver, don't get me wrong, but Jets don't really have a lot of run threats on offense. And if you follow the NFL, I think you know that the NFL is all about the big plays, the splash plays. And splash plays typically come because you have home run speed. So what does this mean? Well, it's not just the wide receiver position I'm talking about, because again, the one guy who has home run speed on the Jets offense right now is Breece Hall. He plays running back. I know there are some younger guys who have great time speed, like an Xavier Gibson or an Izzy Abanikanda, but they haven't really flashed that on the field yet. So I think really the focus for the Jets, one of the focuses at least, should be trying to increase the speed level on this offense. Now, I'll throw out another caveat here. I think that there are many different ways to build the offense. As I've said on many times on the show, stylistically, there are certain things you may prefer, but it's really more about quality than it is pure style. I'd rather have a great player who's a possession receiver than a mediocre home run threat at the wide receiver position, than a mediocre deep threat. But if we're talking about an ideal world, if we're talking about, what's the best way the Jets could build this thing up, it's finding good players, I think, who add a lot of speed to the equation. Because in the NFL, it's very difficult to string together 8, 9, 10 play drives on a consistent basis. Now, good teams do it. good players do it. With Aaron Rodgers back at quarterback next year, the Jets should be able to do it more frequently than they did in 2023. Jets should be able to do everything on offense better and with more frequent success than they did in 2023. But it's not, it's just not easy, because if you are constantly needing to put together long drives, if you don't have any guys who can hit the home run for you, it becomes tricky, because like one penalty, as you know, one penalty could destroy a drive. Now, it should not destroy a drive to the extent that penalties destroyed the Jets drives in 2023. It's like in 2023, if the Jets had like one holding penalty, the drive was over. It should not be an automatic. But we know that penalties put you behind the sticks. We know that mistakes happen. A guy could, if you need to execute 8, 9, 10 straight times to score, one mistake can sink you. And it doesn't matter how good you are, it's just tough to do that over and over and over. And that's why you need home run threats. You need guys who can, eat up big chunks of yardage on one play, so that, like a one play 80-yard touchdown is great, but if you produce like one home run play on a drive, suddenly you may only need like 4 plays to score. And that's a key, because, eventually something goes wrong if you run enough plays on offense. You hear across the NFL, defenses, a lot of the great defenses play conservatively. They're built to prevent the big play, because the entire theory behind it is that, offenses are eventually going to make a mistake. If we force them to drive the whole field, if we force them to just take 6, 7, 8-yard gains, eventually a receiver's going to slip, somebody's going to drop a pass, somebody's going to commit a penalty. It's much more difficult to play offense in this league when you can't go the distance. Now, the Jets are in a better spot than they have been in many years in the past, because the Jets really have not had many home run threats on their offense through the years. I mean, Robbie Anderson was one, but he wasn't, he was nowhere near a great player. He was a pretty good wide receiver for a number of years, but he wasn't the type of guy you could run your offense through. Jets have 2 guys they could run their offense through, and one of them is a home run hitter in Breece Hall. So now we're really talking about filling in kind of like the supporting players. We've got a good number 1 receiver, a guy who, in an ideal world, maybe you could get somebody just as good as him and maybe drop Garrett Wilson down to 1A. You also have a guy who is as explosive as any back in the NFL in Breece Hall. And, I think with Breece, you'd like to see a little bit more consistency. We're going to get to how Breece can show more consistency. A lot of it has nothing to do with Breece. A lot of it has to do with some of the other guys helping him out, making his life easier. But I think that if we're talking about how the Jets want to build this offense, I think that adding some home run ability, adding some speed, big time speed, would be certainly something that would be a big boost to this offense. And again, like, I don't want to overstate it, because if you just get good players here, no matter what their style is, it will be a big help. But with this in mind, when you watch these skill players this weekend in Indianapolis, once they hit the field over the weekend, you might want to keep an eye on some of the speed drills. I could say 40-yard dash, but I think that tends to get a little overhyped. Still, 40-yard dash can broadly give you an idea of how fast a guy is, how explosive he is. And then you have your other drills like your 3-cone, which, test change of direction. There are a couple other drives that kind of show you athletic explosiveness. So those are the things you might want to watch if you're tuning into the combine this weekend from Indianapolis. But of course, it's not just about adding talent to the skill positions. Jets also have to get better in the trenches. And we know that they need to protect Aaron Rodgers better. But another priority is better run blocking. As we continue on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets, we'll talk about why that's so essential and what we can watch for this weekend in Indianapolis. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. It's an exciting time in the NBA. The regular season's winding down. Teams are jockeying for playoff positioning. Teams looking to get home court advantage. Teams looking to get one of the top 6 spots in their conferences, because then you avoid the play-in. Other teams are just trying to get into the play-in. There are other teams down at the bottom of the standing looking to go on a run so that they can have a shot to make the tournament. Well, no matter what team you root for, you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams on FanDuel with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Again, quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. So a big shout out to you every day. There's people who tune in each day. You should also know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV with the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. And today on Locked On Jets, we're keeping an eye on the NFL scouting combine in Indianapolis in the broader context of what do the New York Jets need to do to fix their offense this offseason. That's clearly going to be the priority. Jets have an excellent defense, but the offense this past season was not very good. That's an understatement, and we know they didn't have their quarterback. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers coming back fixes that. But there were other issues on this offense that go well beyond that. And, there are lots of things the Jets can do to fix their offense. We know they have to get much better on the offensive line. The offensive line was an enormous problem for this team in 2023. In fact, it was such a problem that I think it's fair to question how good the offense would have been even with Rodgers in the mix, because the Jets could not block people up front. They could not keep the quarterback clean, and they could not move people in the run game. And I know that a lot of the focus, rightly so, has been on making sure Aaron Rodgers is protected, because Rodgers is reaching kind of the advanced stage of his career where 2024, he'll probably have to play from the pocket more than he ever has in his career. The last couple of years in Green Bay, his mobility was really going down. He was not making as many plays from outside the pocket. And I think that that's not going to get better, first of all, with another year of age added, but also an injury which robs players, especially players at an advanced age in their careers, of mobility. So I think we know that Rodgers needs to be kept upright. We know Rodgers needs to be protected. That's a key for the Jets, because even a guy who's older, most quarterbacks in the NFL, once they reach their 20th season, still really know how to read the defense, and they can get the ball to where it needs to go if they have the time to do it. They're not so good at evading pressure. But all this talk about, and the talk, which is absolutely accurate, about making sure Rodgers is protected, also to an extent maybe ignores that the Jets need to improve their run blocking also. If you look at Breece Hall a year ago, he almost had 1,000 yards rushing. And if you look at a play-to-play basis, just looking not just looking at average, but looking at whether a play was successful or not, Breece had a very low success rate, despite being a pretty efficient runner. And I don't think that a lot of that's Breece's fault. I think Breece is an excellent back. In fact, I think if Breece got good run blocking, we'd be talking about him as maybe one of the 10 best backs in the NFL. I think he's got potential to be one of the few backs in the NFL who actually makes a difference in an offense. There aren't many. The running back position has been greatly devalued in the NFL over the last 20, 30 years, where lots of teams are just bringing guys to plug in, and you can, if you have a platoon, there are lots of guys who are roughly equal. There aren't many backs who really add surplus value. Breece could be one of them, but the Jets need to block better for him up front, because too frequently there was just nowhere to run. But going beyond Breece, I think when we're talking about a running back, we know now at this point in time, this isn't the era of 20, 30 years ago. We know that running backs have a shelf life in this league, that there are only so many hits you can take. If you want to preserve a running back for the long run, if you don't want a running back to burn out early, you have to keep them on a pitch count. You have to have a second back who can absorb some of the carries. And it's very difficult to find two Breece Hall caliber running backs. I mean, the Jets are lucky to have one. The second guy's just not going to be as good. The second guy's going to be a more normal back. Now, is that going to be Izzy Abanikanda? Will it be somebody else? It's difficult to say, but what I would say is the Jets need to make sure they can run block, because Breece can't get every single carry, and the Jets want to be able to run the ball effectively. And when we talk about Rodgers reaching an advanced stage, I still think he has the potential to be a very effective quarterback. I think he has the potential to be an above average quarterback. I think he should be the best quarterback we've seen with the Jets in some time. But I think Rodgers' MVP days, just looking at this objectively, looking at what he's done the last couple of years, looking at the fact he's coming off a serious injury, looking at the fact, he's 40 years old, very good chance his MVP days are over. And that doesn't mean that the Jets are doomed necessarily next season, but it means that they can't ask Rodgers to be Superman. They need him to be a good quarterback. And that means supporting him. That means putting other pieces around him. And that part of that is having a good run game. because if you have a good run game, it makes life so much easier on your quarterback. It's not really just about play action. People say if you have a great run game, your play action's more effective. And the numbers indicate that's not really true. That there's really not that big of a correlation between play action success and running the ball effectively. It's more about the blocking schemes. It's more about the player movements that get defensive players to bite. Because defensive players have to play the run against play action. It's not so much that. It's just more that you don't want everything to be on Aaron's plate. Now, there's going to be a lot on Aaron's plate. You should expect the Jets to get better quarterback play than they've gotten in some time with Aaron Rodgers under center for this team in 2024. But it makes life much easier on a quarterback if you have a run game that you can rely on. Because think about how many plays you need to win a game. Let's say you need like 25 first downs to win a game, something like that. Well, it becomes much easier if you can just hand the ball off. You just turn around and hand the ball off, and that's one less play you have to make if you can run the ball successfully. If it's as simple as just turning around, handing the ball off to a running back, and you can have a successful play, that's one less play that Aaron Rodgers needs to make. And I think this is like one of those problems the Jets have had for a long time. It was true when they had younger quarterbacks. It's not, it's true it might be true to an extent with Aaron Rodgers, but they just expect the quarterback to be able to do too much. When Sam was here, when Zach was, Zach's probably on his way out with Darnold and Wilson, it was like they were expecting these guys to carry the franchise. Now, I think Rodgers is more equipped to carry the franchise than some of these other guys, but while Darnold and Wilson may have been too young and maybe not good enough to carry a franchise, Rodgers is, at an age where I don't think it's necessarily fair to expect him to be the only guy who can lift the team up. I think that the Jets need to help lift Aaron up as much as Aaron lifts the team up. And that's the way these relationships work when they're successful, is that the quarterback makes a big difference. But the team also does what it can to help the quarterback out. And one of the best ways you can help a quarterback out is to have an effective run game. That means you got to run block better, though. And again, we go back to the issues on the offensive line. And a lot of the problems the Jets had last year on offense were not about Aaron Rodgers being injured. They weren't about the lack of talent at receiver, although both of those were obviously key points. Don't get me wrong. Those were both critical factors in why the Jets struggled. But the reality is that if the Jets can't block better than they did in 2023, the offense is going to struggle no matter who's playing quarterback, no matter who's playing receiver. Yeah, the offense will be better when you upgrade quarterback, and the offense will be better if you're able to upgrade receiver. But the Jets need to be able to block guys better. If they want to run the ball effectively, they need to be able to block. Look, obviously pass blocking is really important, and it's taken precedence with good reason, but Jets also need to bring in some guys who can run block here. And so the point is this weekend, and this is going to be true also in free agency, but when you're watching the combine, again, the combine only tells you so much, but when the offensive linemen take the field, you'll watch some of the power drills, see which guys show that they can move that they can hit guys with power. And this will probably be more on the film than in the combine, but there are still certain things you can watch in the combine to figure out which guys might be good fits, which guys might be effective run blockers. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're now going to leave the offensive line. We're going to move back to the skill positions because there's one position that Aaron Rodgers uses a lot in the passing game. It's out of the backfield. It's running backs. And we just talked about the importance of the running backs in the run game versus offensive linemen, but running backs for the Jets in 2024 could also be pretty big weapons in the passing game. And we'll talk about that as we continue on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has so many benefits. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. We're talking about how the Jets should look to rebuild their offense this offseason. And along those lines, some things you could watch for if you tune into the combine this weekend from Indianapolis. Let's talk about the running back position. Jets have a great number one running back in Breece Hall. a guy who contributed a lot in the passing game this past season. If you look at Breece's numbers, near the league lead in a lot of the receiving categories out of the backfield. And I actually expect those numbers to go down this next year. And I think that, Breece's numbers on some level indicate kind of a failure with the Jets offense where they didn't have the receivers to throw the ball to. When you're talking about the volume Breece Hall got out of the passing game, it's not that Breece isn't great. Breece is great, but you don't want your running back to be that involved in the passing game. That said, I think the running backs will have a role out of the backfield this year with Aaron Rodgers, and potentially a big role. If you look historically through Rodgers' career, running backs tend to get a great number of targets. Now, I think part of the reason for that is Rodgers is just such a smart quarterback. And Rodgers, historically through his career, has not been a guy who's produced a lot of turnovers. He's typically been safe with the football. And that's because Rodgers, he's so cerebral that he knows when he should take a chance. He knows when he should put the ball into a tight window. And if it's not there, he's perfectly content to just check it down to the running back and throw it to him. So, that's an area where I think the Jets should focus is make sure you get guys who can catch the football out of the backfield. Now, we know Breece can do that. And Breece, Breece brings a lot to the table. But again, going back to what I said in the last segment, I don't know that you necessarily want to put too much on Breece's plate. I think, the idea is that you should try and preserve Breece, not just for future years, but you also want to make sure Breece is healthy for October, November, December. You want to make sure Breece is not worn down by the end of the season. Now, Breece is so big, Breece is so strong that, he probably can handle a decent workload. But you want to have a second back in here who can kind of take some of the load off Breece's plate. You want somebody who can help him out. Beyond that, in the NFL, I think we all know offense is all about finding good matchups for you. So out of the backfield, if you have a talented receiving back, that's somebody who can create a matchup problem for you because typically they end up one-on-one against linebackers. And there just are not many good cover linebackers in this league. Linebacker is a position that's more about stopping the run. And, if they play coverage, they play zone. It's more about just like dropping back to a spot on the field and, viewing the quarterback and maybe making a break on the ball or something to that effect. But there aren't really many natural cover linebackers in this league. So if you find a running back who's a talented receiver, a guy who can run routes effectively, that could be a big boost for your team. And the thing is, I feel like when we talk about running backs that go early in the draft, sometimes the guys who are talented receivers fall a little bit. And it's just true in general. Running back's not really a high value position in the NFL for reasons that we've laid out. Teams have kind of figured out you can get effective running back play by having a platoon, by bringing in a couple solid guys. If you run block, okay, your production will be just fine. But there are guys who are talented receiving backs who fall near the end of the draft. And this is a real opportunity, especially for a team like the Jets that's not particularly draft pick rich this year. Jets are pretty asset poor because of some moves that they've made, including the Rodgers trade. Running back's a position where you have a reasonable chance of finding guys who are effective later on, especially guys who are talented receivers. And again, Jets need to put more stress on defenses. Jets in 2023 they very seldom put stress on the defense, and that's true in many ways. They didn't really have guys who created matchups. Nathaniel Hackett's schemes were very rudimentary. They're kind of outdated. So schematically, the Jets weren't really putting stress on defenses. But one way you can put stress on the defense is create matchup problems. Find a back who can run routes out of the backfield. Find a back who's a talented pass catcher who can make plays in space. And again, the Jets have one of those guys in Breece Hall, but you want to add. You'd like to have more than one. If you bring in a talented second back, then you create interesting personnel groupings where maybe you could play the new back and Breece together. So, this one might be more about positional drills. Running backs do have, they don't really run a big route tree, especially at the combine, but they do have some receiving positional drills. And, to be honest with you, NFL Network's coverage of these drills is not particularly stellar, but this could be something worth watching is just trying. And maybe if you see somebody who looks really good, you can go back and watch their college film. And that's really what the combine's about. The combine is not so much about teaching you. The combine's not so much about a bad player who has a great weekend and suddenly becomes a star. Sometimes what happens is a guy's kind of a standout of the combine, and maybe you've never heard of him before. It gives you a chance to go back to the film and watch what he did in college and kind of get a sense for what he's able to do. So I think that this is an opportunity for the Jets. When we talk about the late rounds, and I think there's a decent chance they'll draft a running back. Joe Douglas has typically drafted a running back when he's run drafts for the Jets, and typically these running backs have been later round picks. Breece was the one back the Jets drafted early, but they typically have taken a shot at a running back in later rounds, and unfortunately, they haven't had a whole lot of success. In part, I think because they haven't really drafted guys who were particularly explosive out of the backfield, guys who were talented receivers. So, an opportunity for the Jets to kind of rethink the way they've imagined the running back position, the way they've scouted the running back position, find players who can help Aaron Rodgers out, make his life easier, and help create mismatches on this offense. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Hope you have a great weekend, everybody. We'll be back next week to talk more Jets.